Now the story of the Jewish exiles who lost everything, and the one man who had no choice but to help them rebuild it. It's the book of Nehemiah. There's a bunch of stuff that has happened throughout history that it's real fun to sit around with no consequences and a drink in your right hand, talking with your buddies and be like, that's how I'd fix that thing that went wrong in history. Or I tell you what somebody ought to do is this, that would straighten the thing out. But the truth of the matter is, undoing certain things in history is very, very hard. For example, undoing the results of conquest and repatriation, it's just brutally difficult. You can't unmake it. I mean, think about Alexander the Great in the era that we're looking at here. We're in this idyllic Achaemenid Persian era that you and I are looking at in Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther here at the end of the Bible. But all of this comes to an end about 80 years after what we're looking at when Alexander the Great shows up and is like, yeah, I'm just going to more or less crush everything about Persia and replace it with something new. And to make sure it never goes back, I'm going to intermarry everybody. I'm going to spread Greek language and culture. And that's exactly what he does. There is no way to put that toothpaste back into the tube after Alexander did what he did. The world changed forever. And really, pick any other conquest that comes to mind. Pick westward expansion in my country, in the United States. There's really no way to have the Lakota Sioux roam the plains of the Dakotas again and hunt buffalo. I don't think they want to probably do that either, but you just can't go back to that pause point where everything was sort of broken and a way of life got cut off. It's sort of unfixable. The toothpaste won't go back in the tube. How about the Atlantic slave trade? How would you fix the devastating results of that grave injustice that was done to people? I don't know. Does anybody know? Because it seems like people have tried a lot of different things, and I'm not sure anything can ultimately undo that. You got to find some kind of just and right way to move forward at some point, but I don't know. Once people have been moved, you can't really unmove people. It's very, 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 very hard to go back in history. That is exactly what those two leaders are trying to do. They're trying to go back to the last good save point. They're trying to get all the right people to stand in exactly the right places and do exactly the roles that their families should have been doing all along. They're trying to do an end run historically around the Persian conquest and the Babylonian conquest and the Assyrian conquest. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of years, almost 300 years of conquesting that they're trying to unmake. And really, they're trying to go back even 600 years almost and unmake the splitting of the people into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. This is such a massive thing that they're trying to accomplish, and I think it is really difficult for us to appreciate the gravity of the rebuild the people quest in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. But maybe it's a little bit easier when we think about how hard it would be through policy to unmake some of the more difficult historical phenomena that have occurred within living memory, within generational memory of the conversation you and I are having right now. Well, Nehemiah's plan seems to be through sheer force of will and authority of the state that he momentarily gets to wield on behalf of the king he serves, Artaxerxes of Persia. He's going to find the people who should be there and playing each of these roles that are needed to make society work in this context. And if he can't find them because they're dead, then he's going to find their kids or their kids' kids to make sure somebody from each family who's supposed to be doing what they're doing is in the position to do it and living where they're supposed to be living. And then when everyone is in the right place and it's all funded and it's all undergirded by a covenant and an agreement for how things are going to be, then we can start over. And that's what we're getting to in Nehemiah chapter 12. The reset point, the try to achieve the virtually historically impossible point of putting back together something that seems irreparably broken over generations of calcification. That's where we are. Nehemiah 12 starts like this. These are the priests and Levites who returned with Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and with Jeshua. Wait, what? Okay, if you're paying attention, to the last 2 seasons of this podcast, the one on Nehemiah and the one we did before that on Esther, you know that both of them overlapped as well with the book of Ezra. And you know that we just jumped backwards in history like 80 years right here, 90 years right here, from Nehemiah chapter 11 to Nehemiah chapter 12. The last couple days, we've had a list of names of people who in 444 BC in Jerusalem were being assigned to or volunteering to repopulate the recently rebuilt Jerusalem. And now we go one verse forward into chapter 12, and we're all the way back to the 530s BC and the era of Zerubbabel. What are we doing here? These were the priests and Levites who returned with Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and with Jeshua. Oh, wait a minute. I think I know exactly what we're doing here. Oh, Nehemiah and Ezra, you sly dogs. What I think they're doing is giving us a list of all of the people descended from the leaders and the priests clear back from the early days of Persia when this whole big rebuild the people project started a few generations ago, to assure the reader that the right people from the right families are in the right jobs, and that these priests are priests you can count on. They still have the blessing and assurances of God upon them because they're descended from the right people, and these are the people who should have the job. Here's what we get next. These were the priests and Levites who returned with Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and with Jeshua: Sariah, Jeremiah, Ezra, Amariah, Maluk, Hattush, Shechaniah, Rehu, Meremoth, Edo, Ginnathan, Abijah, Mijamin, Medaiah, Bilgah, Shemaiah, Joyrib, Jediah, Salu, Amok, Hilkiah, and Jediah. These were the leaders of the priests and their associates in the days of Jeshua. Okay, Jeshua was the priest during the time of Zerubbabel, 80, 90 years before the stuff we're looking at here in Nehemiah. Cool, they're all accounted for. Everybody's standing where they were supposed to be standing back then. Let's see if that carries over further. Verse 8, the Levites were Jeshua, Binnui, Kadmiel, Sherebiah, Judah, and also Mathaniah, who, together with his associates, was in charge of the songs of thanksgiving. Bakubiah and Uni, their associates, stood opposite them in the services. Okay? So again, the original audience would have been like, all right, those are the right people. They're in the right place. There is a clear provenance, a chain of custody of all the people doing what they're supposed to be doing. Verse 10, Jeshua was the father of Joachim, Joachim the father of Eliashib, the father of Joadiah, Joadiah the father of Jonathan, and Jonathan the father of Jaddua. All right, so the people who lead the songs, the people who officiate all of this, they're all descended from the people who were doing it in the first place. So we're 11 verses into this list, and so far everything checks out. Everybody is where they ought to be. All of these people are legit. Verse 12, in the days of Joachim, these were the heads of the priestly families: of Sariah's family, Moriah; of Jeremiah's, Hananiah; of Ezra's, Meshullam; of Aramiah's, Johanan; of Maluk's, Jonathan; of Shechaniah's, Joseph; of Harim, Adnah; of Meremoth's, Helkai; of Edo's, Zechariah; of Ginnathan's, Meshullam; of Abijah, Zikri; of Miniamin's and Mordecaiah's, Piltai; of Bilgah's, Shammua; of Shemaiah's, Jehonathan; of Joarib's, Mattaniah; of Jediah's, Uzai; of Salu's, Kalai; of Amok's, Aber; of Hilkiah's, Hashbiah; of Jediah's, Nethanel. Okay, I want to plead with you right now. Don't be discouraged and don't feel overwhelmed. I understand that I just read you a wall of names, but this is totally untangleable, and we're just going to do it real quick, and you're going to get it, and I'm going to get it, and we're going to high five, and we're going to move on. It's going to be awesome. And so it's fine if you can't make sense of all of these names and you can't remember who connects with who. These are the big ones you need to remember. Zerubbabel. He was the guy who should have been king, and if there was still a kingdom, he would have been king, but instead he was the false king of a subject people to Cyrus the Great, but he was allowed to lead the Jews back to Israel to rebuild the temple. It took a long time, but he succeeded. The high priest who was with him was Jeshua. He's the guy who got the initial sacrifices up and running before there even was a temple. Jeshua probably served for a very long time, and then his son, Joachim, who must have been a legendary high priest, served over a robust temple environment for a very long time. Tons of names involved in that world, in that era of society. And Nehemiah and Ezra want you to know that was all legit. It goes on, verse 22, the family heads of the Levites in the days of Eliashib, Jodiah, and Johanan and Jaddua, as well as those of the priests, were recorded in the reign of Darius the Persian. Now, we don't know what Darius we're talking about here. We know it's not Darius the First, the father of Xerxes, because it's just wrong. A lot of these people weren't even born probably when Darius was king. So it can't be Darius the first we're talking about here, but it could be Darius the second, who was king from 423 to 404. So about 20 years after the events we're looking at here in Nehemiah. Or maybe they're trying to track this list of people involved in the priestly duties all the way forward to the age of Darius III, the last king of Persia. He was defeated by Alexander the Great in the 330s BC. So there are some people who would make the argument that what we're getting here in Nehemiah chapter 12 is a look back all the way to the beginning of the Persian Empire, a look here at the middle of the Persian Empire during the era of Nehemiah and Artaxerxes, and a look forward all the way to the end of the Persian Empire with the final Persian king, that being Darius III, defeated by Alexander the Great, which ended the Persian Empire. This could be interpreted as though we are to understand this as a full spectrum view of the continuity of the priestly families and the high priests all the way through the era of Persia. I think that's a pretty valid read. Here's how it rounds out. The family heads among the descendants of Levi up to the time of Johanan, son of Eliashib, were recorded in the book of the Annals, and the leaders of the Levites were Hashabiah, Sherebiah, Jeshua, son of Kadmiel, and their associates who stood opposite them to give praise and thanksgiving, one section responding to the other, as prescribed by David, the man of God. Mattaniah, Bakbukiah, Obadiah, Meshullam, Talmon, and Akub were gatekeepers who guarded the storerooms at the gates. They served in the days of Joachim, son of Jeshua. There we go again. Jeshua, the high priest with Zerubbabel. Joachim, his son, who no doubt served for a very long time. The son of Josadak, so that's Jeshua's dad. And in the days of Nehemiah, the governor, and of Ezra, the priest and scribe. So two guys, Jeshua and Joachim, had served in this role since 538 BC all the way up till at least now in 444 BC. That's a pretty impressive showing on their part, and their role, just as those two guys, have a steadying effect on the whole narrative. And I think that the way the original audience was intended to read this was to say, dang, this line of priests, this religious thing that we have is bigger than Persia. Empires will rise and fall. Persia even came and went during the era of these priests, this one looking back, this one right now, and these one or two looking forward. That's all it took for Persia. Persia's a blink of an eye. What even is that? But no, Jerusalem and the temple and the sacrificial system and God's chosen people and the high priesthood, that is what is steady moving forward. That is what you should anchor yourselves to. Everyone, once again, in Nehemiah's mind and in Ezra's mind, is standing where they ought to be standing, doing what they ought to be doing. There is absolute continuity here in their mind, continuity that you as a reader can count on in their mind, and they want you to see that, because if indeed they have put everything back in place and there is continuity, then maybe the toothpaste can go back in the tube. Maybe it's Persia and Babylon and Assyria that are flashes in the pan. Maybe this thing is the more real thing. That's what they want you to think about. Legitimacy and historical continuity are the points of this passage. Great job hanging in with me on this one and not being discouraged. This is a complex thing. It's easy to get overwhelmed by it, but I think we handled our business all right, and we're moving forward tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.